Good evening, and thank you all for joining us. We will be providing updates this evening on our state and federal efforts, as well as local attempts at bans that we continue to fight. Additionally, we need your help in Virginia as the Board of Pharmacy is attempting to schedule kratom. We are joined this evening by Matt Salmon, former United States Representative for Arizona, as well as the Chairman of the American Kratom Association. In addition, Mac Haddo, the Senior Fellow on Public Policy for the AKA, is joining us. The Q&A is now open, and I will now turn it over to Matt Salmon for his opening remarks.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate everybody taking the time to join this webinar tonight. This is a crucial time, and I know that we've been kind of saying this till we're blue in the face, that we really need to rely more heavily on advocacy efforts of those of you that are out there, the eyes and ears of the communities that we live in, as well as the ones that are responding when actions like more recently what's happened in Virginia, where the pharmacy board is considering scheduling kratom as a Schedule I, even though we were able to pass in the state legislature the KCPA, it would put those two things at opposition. But it really speaks to the fact that if we're going to be successful and continue to thrive and succeed in the things that we're doing, it's going to take a very, very active group of folks out there across the country listening, being the eyes and ears of the association to know when something like this happens. This kind of snuck up on us. I think that we responded very, very quickly, and I believe adequately. We were being shared the numbers of people that have actually weighed in on this with comments to the pharmacy board, and it's amazing. You guys have done an amazing job, but our work is never through. As long as the FDA is going to continue to present false information that's not based on sound science, and leaning on not just state governments, but local governments, cities. Mac and I were in Newport Beach, California, a few months ago, dealing with a proposed ban there, and we're stomping fires out wherever we can. But it takes not just people, but it takes money. It takes resources for us to get there and to be able to testify before those city councils, those county boards of county supervisors, those pharmacy boards, those state legislatures. And so our efforts in terms of fundraising, in terms of getting everybody on these webinars as knowledgeable as possible, so that we can respond at a moment's notice, is just incredibly important. And I know that Mac's going to talk about some of the different state efforts, and most recently, this effort with Virginia and the Virginia Pharmacy Board. But I want to thank you all for participating. We wouldn't be as successful as we are without you. That's a fact, and we need you more than I can say. So thanks for being on this call, and our work is never over. And God bless you, and I'm going to turn it over to Mac.
Thanks, Matt, and thank you for your continued leadership. I know when Matt Salmon, then he was a member of Congress in 2016, representing the 5th District of Arizona, when he and I spoke about the kratom issue, which at the time was a recommended scheduling by the Food and Drug Administration to the Drug Enforcement Administration to schedule kratom as a Schedule I substance, metrogene and 7-hydroxymetrogene specifically. And I remember Matt saying to me, do you think we can get help from consumers of kratom? And I was relatively new to the American Kratom Association. I had a very general understanding that there were people in the kratom community who were incensed by this recommendation. But I can tell you frankly that I had no idea of the power that the kratom advocacy community would be able to exhibit in directly contacting both the Drug Enforcement Administration and to contact their elected representatives so that it gave a lot of impetus to our being able to generate letters in a relatively short period of time. The announcement was made in the Federal Register by the Drug Enforcement Administration at the end of September. It crossed over the Labor Day holiday, which obviously put us out of direct contact with members' offices. And then it was a 30-day time ticker for this to become effective. And so in that short period of time, we saw tens of thousands of Kratom advocates who stood up. The DEA public affairs officer told me directly that they had never seen anything to equal it when they had put up a recommendation for scheduling in the Federal Register for a substance like this. And I think that was the hallmark of the Kratom community in coalescing around and rallying to the cause, which required that kind of outpouring of support in order to fight against this unfair demonization of Kratom, and certainly the unfair recommendation that was not based on science, but rather the opinions of the FDA. And when you fast forward to 2024, we continue to confront that same disinformation. It hasn't changed. It's the same kind of nonsense that the FDA repeats over and over again in some vain attempt to make it true because they repeat it often enough. It's still the same lie that it was in 2016 as it is today in 2024. Now, some things obviously have changed. We are able to successfully combat the FDA in their disinformation campaign at state levels. We do that because legislators are pretty finely attuned to understanding or trying to understand what the scientific evidence is. And we've been able to beat back bans since 2017, which was the last state, Rhode Island, in order to enacted a ban at the request of the Food and Drug Administration. Since that 2017 bellwether date, you see bans that were recommended in West Virginia, Tennessee, Mississippi multiple times, Louisiana multiple times, South Dakota, South Carolina, Georgia, New Jersey, New York, Nebraska, Montana, Washington. All of those states proposed bans at one time or another in the last 8 years, and we've been able to win those battles. But the FDA has recognized that the battlefield for them has to change. They can't win in very public settings where you have a legislative body that deliberates over a long period of time in order to sell the nonsense that they peddle. And so now they've gone to state and local governments. And what we're seeing in Virginia is evidence of that. They find a well-intentioned medical doctor who submits a petition for scheduling of Kratom to the Virginia Board of Pharmacy, and that triggers the series of events that we're now leading to, which will culminate in a hearing on June 25th in Richmond, Virginia, to discuss whether or not Kratom should be scheduled. They have opened up a comment period, which is required by the statute, in order to gather comments from the public. I encourage everyone that has not yet done so to get on and actually submit your comments, and get everyone you know to submit their comments, because they will weigh in. Those comments will have a significant influencing factor. I remember in a similar situation in the state of Ohio, where the Board of Pharmacy had taken the FDA's request to ban Kratom in the state of Ohio, and they had a process that required, after the Board of Pharmacy had reviewed and then voted to ban Kratom, they had to hold a public hearing. And the day of that hearing, the line of public commenters went out the room, which was a relatively small room that they had convened this meeting in, through the hallway, down the elevators, out of the foyer and the steps, and down a second foyer, outside, and circled the block. Over 300 people showed up to express their outrage at the proposed scheduling of Kratom, which was simply replicating what the Food and Drug Administration was saying about Kratom that had been discredited by an evaluation of independent evaluators, and in each case they found that the evidence the FDA was providing was insufficient. We know that's true in 2016 when the Drug Enforcement Administration responded not only to the 51 members of the Congress that signed a letter and the 13 members of the Senate, but they listened to the tens of thousands of Kratom advocates. They saw on the We the People website at the White House a petition where 146,000 people signed a petition saying, do not ban Kratom. They listened. And then in 2018, when Dr. Giroir, with his brilliant letter in withdrawing the scheduling recommendation, and then subsequently characterized what the FDA had done as being based on embarrassingly poor evidence and data, and castigated the FDA for doing so because he respected the science. And I've told many people that in a conversation that I had with Dr. Giroir, where I was obviously appreciative of the initiative that he took in order to withdraw that recommendation for scheduling, he told me, he said, you need to understand, Mac, I am not an advocate for Kratom. I am an advocate for good science. And in this case, the FDA completely missed the boat on this. There is no way that they have the sufficient evidence and data in order to schedule Kratom under the criteria that's set by the Controlled Substances Act. And we saw that again replicated when the FDA took their third strike, went to the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs in 2021, who then referred the issue to the Expert Committee on Drug Dependence, comprised of 12 independent international experts on substance abuse and addiction, and they unanimously voted that there was insufficient evidence. After all of that, you would think that the FDA would at least step back and reevaluate their position on Kratom. They have not. They continue to double down, and now we see it evidenced in state and local government actions where the medical professionals have been influenced by the FDA. They borrow the credibility of the FDA to the extent that there is any credibility on issues like this, and they go into bodies like the Board of Pharmacy, or you see it in local government meetings where you will see the local public health people or the law enforcement people who will testify that they see things, and I think in many cases make up things in order to justify the recommendation. In a recent local government meeting, I heard the sheriff talk about how there had been all of these incidents involving children in the consumption of Kratom outside of convenience stores or gas stations. And one of the council members asked the police officer directly, how many in our city? And the police officer stepped back and said, well, actually none here. Well, where did they happen? Well, they happened in surrounding jurisdictions. This was, by description of the police officer, anecdotal. Anecdotal. That's another name for made up, because there were no records, there are no police reports. This is just the general narrative that has been infused into the Kratom discussion by the Food and Drug Administration and by anti-Kratom critics. And so that's the landscape that we have to confront today. The reality is that the battlegrounds have shifted from discussions, for the most part, about bans at state legislative levels, and they've been drilling down into those local levels. They are important, very important jurisdictions that we have to fight as often as we can to win these battles, because local law enforcement people have tremendous credibility with these city councils and the county councils, and we simply have to be there to show up and do the very best we can. I recognize, and I think it would be a folly for us not to at least take note of the fact that there has been a fatigue within the advocacy community. Some of it because of our own making, because we've been successful in beating back these bans. And there's a general view that we're going to win again. And we're not seeing that as often as we need to. And certainly there have been circumstances where local governments have been misled by these influencers in the form of police officers or public health bodies, where they say, oh, Kratom is dangerous. I heard this just recently. Kratom is a very dangerous substance. And then the question is put to them, says who? And they say the Food and Drug Administration. That same Food and Drug Administration, as everyone now knows, conducted a dose-finding study among 40 human participants, an ascending dose study where they started out at a low dose and kept escalating it. The prediction by the FDA was that when they got to 4 to 6 grams, there would be people having seizures writhing on the ground. They got to 12 grams of the 40 participants to experience some nausea, not in the definition of the FDA's own study criteria, a significant adverse event. It was not. There was no widespread problem. It was 2 of 40 of the participants. And at that point, the FDA concluded the study recognizing that kratom appeared to be well tolerated across all dose levels, that it was safe for human consumption, so safe that the FDA can now proceed with what's called a human abuse potential study that will take several years to complete to assess what the actual addiction liability is, if any, to the consumption of kratom products. This is the problem that we face today, because there are people that will gloss over that. They won't recognize what the reality is, and they will say with a straight face, oh, the FDA says kratom is dangerous. The FDA, in a court proceeding in Southern California, had to say on the record that the FDA, have not yet come to a determination as to whether kratom is dangerous or not, when the judge required them to show up under oath with expert witnesses to testify to the truth of that claim, and the FDA bailed. It is incredible when you hear at a local level well-intentioned people say, well, the FDA says that it's dangerous. Now, what is true is the FDA has not yet acknowledged on their website, their FDA and kratom website, that fact, and they should. And we're going to petition them over and over and over again to correct that record, to make sure that there is clarity around exactly what the FDA's position on kratom is. They can have the opinion that kratom may be highly addictive. They can have the opinion that kratom may, in rare instances, be involved, along with polysubstance abuse, in adverse events and perhaps deaths related to kratom. That is an opinion that they're allowed to have, but they have to back it up with science. And to date, they've not been able to do that. And because they cannot do it, they cannot testify under oath about their repeated claims that kratom is dangerous. And that's why we, as a community, need to stand up and to have our voices heard on these things. So we need to set aside fatigue and apathy along the way. There also have been divisions among advocates, and that is natural to occur when you have a community of people who, since 2016 to 2024, 8 years, it is natural that there's going to be people that say, you know what, I've been carrying the burden all by myself. Why isn't someone else pitching in? Or any number of fair observations about a community that simply is sort of had the problem with their own success in going forward. There are also divisions that naturally occur because the community is not just a diverse community, but it's one that everyone's experiences drives their beliefs about what the correct public policy about kratom could be. A good example of that is that there are people that divide along the product formulation lines. The raw leaf product itself, pure kratom coming in from Southeast Asia, is something that in a powder form that can be mixed into water into a decoction, and you can experience the benefits of kratom. Some people, because of the bitterness of the taste, prefer to have capsules. Some people also prefer to have other product forms, which are fine, by the way, gummies, liquids. Those are all fine things. The divisions in the community, however, sometimes fall along false documentation about which is the preferred or the unpreferred way to do things. There's some criticism in the community about where kratom products are sold. I hear it all the time. You have kratom sold in gas stations or in smoke shops, and the criticism is, how can you allow that to happen? Those are terrible venues in order to sell your products. And why wouldn't you want to buy them in pharmacies? And why wouldn't you want to buy kratom products in health food stores and GNCs? Well, the truth is that kratom products were sold in GNCs. They were mainstream prior to the vicious attack launched by the Food and Drug Administration in 2016 that scared off all of those traditional marketing channels because of the claims made by the FDA, and I would amend that, the false claims made by the FDA about the alleged dangers of kratom, which today they cannot support. And today, the FDA, in a public meeting, the deputy commissioner of the FDA stated that, in fact, kratom, that they wanted to work with Congress in order to develop a set of regulatory and statutory guidelines for the manufacturing of kratom to make sure it's manufactured safely, that the labeling of the products is done so that consumers are informed about the products that they're consuming and with directions for safe use, which we fully support, and then they wanted to restrict it to children. These are things that we embrace as a community that are a part of the Kratom Consumer Protection Act model legislation that we promote among the states. This is something that's happening already. The FDA wants to simply carve out a niche in order to justify what they've now come to the conclusion that kratom is not a dangerous substance per se and simply has to be regulated in order to permit the safe consumption of kratom products. We welcome that. And I think that eventually this change that's moving now in our direction is going to be finished, hopefully sooner than later, because the FDA cannot hide forever from the evidence and data that is now present that supports the safe use of kratom products. I know there are also people that are concerned about extract products, and we are as well. And it is our belief at the American Kratom Association, and we vigorously promote this concept, is that the only extract products that are safe for consumption are those that use appropriate extraction solvents that are approved by the FDA as food-grade solvents to make sure that you limit the concentration and therefore the power of the kratom's alkaloids to make sure that they are not dangerously extracted in order to deliver an effect that the natural plant simply does not provide. Extract products are not evil. Extract products are perfectly safe if formulated the way that they should and labeled appropriately. They are different. There's no question about that. You do not consume pure leaf powder kratom products in the same way that you would an extract product, and that's why it is so important that everyone follow the directions for use on the label for those products. And importantly, if there are no directions for safe use on that product, don't use it. Toss it away. You cannot allow this community to be dragged down because you have bad actors, vendors who are marketing products that are not properly labeled, not properly formulated, don't follow the guidelines. And the only way you'll know that is if they're labeled properly and that there is, in fact, standards that govern market entry of these products to require that a manufacturer has a certificate analysis to back up the actual formulation of their product complying with the state statute that governs the market entry of those products. We continue to work every day in trying to secure more states that will pass the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, because we know at some point it will develop the critical mass of states where this legislation has passed that will lead to the U.S. Congress actually forcing and compelling the FDA into the current century we're in and do the same thing that the Congress was compelled to do back in 1994 in passing the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act that forced the FDA to regulate dietary supplements. We now need to do the same thing when it comes to kratom, because we cannot rely upon, nor can we trust the FDA to do it on their own devices. We know that that's not going to happen, and that's why it's so important for us to work closely in it. Now, there is another issue that we're all keenly aware of, and that is some of the growing anti-kratom communities driven largely by those families who believe that they've lost a loved one to kratom consumption. And obviously, our hearts go out to any grieving family that has experienced the loss that is associated in any material or accurate way with the consumption of a kratom product. There is no one that is more critical of the product that was used and that for which there was an adjudication in Florida where the consumer purchased on the internet a product called Space Dust. And that kratom product, purportedly to be a kratom product, arrived in a enhanced Ziploc bag with a Sharpie scrawled across it calling it Space Dust, with not one word about what else was in that product, what its formulation was, what the actual ingredients were. We don't know what was in that product. And there wasn't a single letter of instruction or labeling on that product. That product never should have been on the marketplace. That product was known to the FDA to be on the marketplace for more than a year. And if there's anyone who bears a responsibility, other than the manufacturer themselves, who appropriately have an obligation to that family, it should be the FDA as well. And shame on the trial attorneys who like to call that a kratom death, because they know that that's not what really kratom products is. No vendor, no responsible vendor would promote or sell that kind of a product into the marketplace that doesn't have the directions for safe use along the way. And that similarly, as we've seen in other cases where these trial attorneys, who obviously have their own set of goals that are unrelated to protecting the public, but rather to extract a cost that they benefit financially from manufacturers that they perceive have not complied with what are good standards for product liability. And for those companies that are guilty of it, fine, we'll let the judicial system wend its way. But remember that when a trial attorney brings a case, it doesn't mean that that's the gospel truth. If you read every single one of the complaints, within the first couple of paragraphs, they will say, the FDA says the kratom is dangerous. Every single one of them. They rely on what is now debunked and false statements that the FDA has promoted in order to justify this litigation along the way. I know that because I had a conversation last week with one of the kratom critics who told me that they can't say on the Kratom Danger Awareness Facebook page what they really believe, which is the kratom should be regulated. It should be properly labeled. They believe the kratom actually helped their loved one, and it was the bad kratom product that they got. But they're looped in to this extremist group, and I say extreme and their leadership, because their leadership is unwilling to have any civil discussion and find ways of or areas of common agreement that we might have in order to strengthen the argument about the proper regulation of kratom products. I think the significant number of their so-called supporters believe, as we do, that there needs to be these kinds of appropriate regulations, particularly when it is readily acknowledged by the FDA itself that there isn't the evidence and data that's required for banning kratom. But that's what you hear from these extremists who lead the KDA along the way. I know they're listening to me tonight, and I have offered repeatedly to have a discussion with them. They block me at every turn. They call me vile names. They accuse me of being a murderer and all kinds of awful things as a way to justify. And what they repeatedly say when they're asked about justifying how they can claim that kratom has been the cause of a death of a loved one, they say, don't give them the autopsy report. Don't give them the toxicology report. We don't want them to have it. Well, that's the very same thing that happened in the state of Ohio, where you had a mother who discovered her son dead, and sitting beside his nightstand was a bag of kratom products. And when the investigator from the coroner's office arrived at the death scene, he concluded his investigation and informed the mother that he was calling it a kratom death. And she objected and said, no, you don't understand. My son was saved by kratom. He was an addict. 5 years ago, he found kratom, and it turned his life around. It saved his life. It made him so that he could perform socially. He could have a job. He could maintain relationships with people. He was a productive citizen. And the cause of his death was really related to an underlying health condition related to COVID in the view of the mother. And finally, the investigator from the coroner's office relented and said, well, it's going to take us 8 to 12 weeks to get the tox screen back. Let's wait until then. And the mother understood and agreed. The next morning, 10 a.m. in the morning, the coroner himself calls this mother and says, I have sufficient evidence to determine this is a kratom-caused death. Now that's the kind of data that is relied upon, unfortunately, by many people in the kratom danger awareness community. But what this mother did courageously is fought back. She wanted to find the truth about it because she personally was convinced that kratom had really helped her son. And so after a prolonged legal battle that had many twists and turns, all of which called into question the reliability of the actions taken by the two coroners involved in the evaluation of the death of her son, both have now signed amended death certificates saying that the cause of death is undetermined. And the basis for that is after review of the current literature regarding kratom, that these coroners are now convinced that kratom is not legitimately named as the cause of death. I don't know how many of the deaths that are alleged to be attributed to kratom would have the same result, but I can tell you that we won't know as long as people say, don't give them the tox reports, don't give them the autopsy reports. That's hiding the ball, and that's protecting something that doesn't need to be protected, but rather needs sunlight. And I have often told people that when the Tampa Bay Times reporters did their so-called in-depth investigation into the kratom industry, they cited 47 people who had died in the state of Florida. I offered directly, repeatedly to them, get the blood samples of those individuals, submit them to a lab of your choice, and let's see if there are other polydrug use or other substances that would have contributed to or been the cause of the death, rather than rely upon the knee-jerk reaction of some of these medical examiners and coroners who just do what the FDA says they should do. And I gave them that offer and said that we would pay for it, and they declined. They were not interested in the truth. They were interested in a sensationalized clickbait headline. And today, the public is misled by that kind of report without the disclosure that we were willing to pay for the blood samples to be evaluated. We've done our own analysis of the so-called reports that they hand-built, by their description, hand-built from the medical examiners. We've gone back to the same medical examiners, the same coroners in the state of Florida. We've attempted to gather the information, and we find significant gaps that they cannot have come to the conclusions that they claim that they have, and yet they demonize kratom along the way. And then, of course, there's the open question about who funded that. Who gave the Tampa Bay Times, a financially struggling newspaper, as most are in today's consumption of news materials, gave them $400,000 to, for 6 months, dedicate 4 reporters exclusively to kratom? Who paid for that? And we have a public record of one of the trial attorneys saying that he did, or at least he contributed part of it. And yet the Tampa Bay Times says, oh, no, you can't prove that. Well, of course I can't prove it. The question is, what is the truth of it? And they, as a public utility, as a disseminator of information, ought to at least account for it. They refuse to do so. Now, all of that is only to suggest that there is a commonality of an interest that we have to find the truth. We've done our best to determine in every case that we can have evaluated by an independent third-party forensic toxicologist with every autopsy and every tox screen we can get in order to evaluate it, because we want to hear the truth. We want to find out what's happened. Is it possible that there are combinations of products, when kratom taken with and name the substance, that there needs to be warnings put out above it? I suspect there might be, but we won't know that if we hide the ball, if we hide the data, if we hide the information. So that's one of the struggles that we have, we'll continue to have, because overarching all of this, you have the trial attorneys who are advising these extreme leaders of the KDA, don't give anything up, because of course it undermines their cases as well. We think that the right policy with respect to kratom is to take all of the available evidence, determine what the appropriate labeling restrictions should be, and they should then be published into Kratom Consumer Protection Acts. And where it's appropriate to strengthen the labeling, we're all in. We want to do that. And that's what our common goal should be. And unfortunately, that's not it. So where we are today, and then I'm going to open up for any questions. You can ask your questions in the chat. Where we need to be today is to focus on the Virginia Board of Pharmacy. We've got until tomorrow at 5 p.m. to submit comments. And we've done great so far, but we need you to get your comments in, because you're seeing the anti-kratom people try to make comments here, and it's interesting to read them. And again, I'm not in any way diminishing the heartfelt belief that a parent or a family member might have about whether kratom was the cause of the death. They can have that opinion and they can feel in their grief that that's important. But I think down deep, they want to know the truth too. And what is more important is that you can't replicate a death that might be associated with an adulterated kratom product. And the only way you remedy that is by making sure you have good regulations with good product formulation standards and good labeling standards. And then you minimize the risks that are associated with those kinds of products. I think that if we can come to a commonality of agreement on those things, we can achieve great things in improving the actual framework for regulations on kratom consumers to make sure that they're going to be protected, because that's our goal here at the American Kratom Association. There are some people that say, well, the AKA may have lost its way because they get involved in these Kratom Consumer Protection Acts, and they're just there to protect the industry. We are promoting the Kratom Consumer Protection Act to clean up the industry, and you have to have a partnership with the industry, responsible industry leaders, because they have to be a part of the solution here. But the end game and the ultimate beneficiaries of every Kratom Consumer Protection Act are the consumers that have a higher level of certainty that when they buy a product in a state where a KCP has passed, for which there are specific regulations about product formulations and labeling requirements and age restrictions, that they can have better confidence than if they're buying in the wild, wild west. That's the bottom line. And that's what we're seeking to do here. And that's the message that has to be conveyed both to the boards of pharmacy, like in Virginia, to state legislators across the country, and to these local communities that are making evaluations based on the hyperbole and the false information that's being disseminated by the Food and Drug Administration, even today, when their own scientific evidence disputes their conclusions. This is the challenge that we have. We can't let apathy or fatigue get us in the way. We need to rally, and we need to replicate what happened in 2016 when we go to the Board of Pharmacy. There will be a hearing before the Board of Pharmacy on June 25th in the morning. We're now doing some work with the staff there to determine exactly what the format will be, how many minutes each speaker gets, and we're going to circulate that information because we want to be present there, just as we were in Ohio. We want to send the message that we want responsible science to drive this public policy, not the hyperbole, not the opinions of people, however well-intentioned they may be. And we want science and evidence and data that Dr. Joie referenced that is credible in order to protect the people in the state of Virginia. And then we need to be prepared to replicate that battle every place we can. We did it in Nevada. We did it in Ohio. We're going to continue to do it here in Virginia. And we will fight the battle whenever and however we can in order to get the truth about kratom actually put up. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Ryan, and we can go through questions that we can answer.
Thank you, Mac. And you've answered half this question, but who in Virginia wants to ban after the KCPA was passed? Has this ever happened?
Well, sure. It's happened in both Florida and Nevada. There just are going to be forces out there that do their best to undermine the kratom community. And so, yes, we have to be constantly vigilant here. In the state of Virginia, you had one medical doctor who obviously was either acting based on information that she had read from the FDA, or acting at the behest of the FDA, for all I know. And that's who made the application or petition the Board of Pharmacy to actually consider this. And that's why the opinions of people that are being expressed now on that site are important, because we want to make sure that the Board of Pharmacy understands that this is not going to be influenced by just a few people that make a difference. And I'll use the example of Arkansas to tell you the power of one critic. You had one doctor, one in the state of Arkansas, who was an addiction recovery doctor who didn't like kratom and he petitioned the health department there, and they held a hearing that started at 10 a.m. and closed at 5 p.m. for public comments, and then it was banned. That was unconscionable, but that's what they did. So and we don't want to have that replicated. So this one doctor who petitioned the Board of Pharmacy in Virginia, we're going to stand ready to fight, and we're going to tell the truth, and no more of the nonsense, no more of the disinformation, and no more of just getting away with repeating lies as the basis for these major public policy changes.
Thank you. And there's a lot of anti-anonymous comments out there. Do they count those? How do we know it's not the same person commenting multiple times?
So I don't know the answer to this precisely. I am hoping that the staff at the Board of Pharmacy will evaluate the so-called anonymous comments. And by the way, it's a free speech right to be able to express an opinion without having to disclose who you are. And I respect people that have that legitimate concern, but I don't respect a person who repeatedly puts up with false information or repeats themselves in order to stack the deck against us. So we're going to be encouraging the staff there to be very careful about evaluating those anonymous commenters on both sides and make sure that they're not just repeating themselves.
And do you know why Des Plaines, Illinois reversed and banned kratom sales?
Well, the mayor of Des Plaines, of course, commented to me at the time when they voted to strip kratom out of their ordinance, said that he didn't expect that they would come back and do this. But I can tell you, and this is just my opinion, having been in the room and watched, this was the law enforcement people. This was the police chief who didn't like the fact that he got swatted. And obviously we talked about in detail the information that he was using, which was fake and false. And unfortunately, these law enforcement people have disproportionate impact and influence over these local city councils. We're going to have to go back into Des Plaines and make our arguments again, and hopefully they'll listen to us. But more importantly, we'll eventually get to the state passage of the KCPA, and that will smooth things out there.
Great. And what's happening in South Carolina?
So there was a ban bill that was proposed in South Carolina. We have successfully defeated that. We also had a KCPA bill that was presented. Both of those are now in abeyance until next year, and we're going to fight it out again. The good news is that even a number of the sponsors who jumped on the South Carolina ban bill after they were contacted said they only did it because of the misinformation that they were provided, and that they appreciated the fact that there was an option that allowed for the regulation of kratom products, and that they were on board. So I think that in South Carolina, we're going to be successful in the 2025 legislative session.
Great. And I was unable to make it to the meeting in Tangipahoa Parish last week. I apologize if I mispronounced that. I would just like to thank the advocates that showed up and spoke. I know it's wearing us out and frustrating that we have to keep doing this, but I am grateful for everyone taking the time to participate. Sincerely, thank you. From Troy.
Yeah, I don't know how we say thank you enough to the people at the local level. These are tough. Ryan's been to a number of them. I've been to a number of them. They're time consuming. You get a couple of minutes when you get there to speak, and yet it's important to do. There can't be a more important endeavor that we have than to show up and show these local council people that there is another part of the story. And that story is that kratom saves lives, that kratom is not on a scientific basis what the critics claim it is. Kratom is not what the kratom danger awareness extremist leaders try to characterize it to be. It is something that needs to be regulated, but once regulated, it should be available to people for the benefits it provides and for the freedoms that people have. We don't live in a country that lets us just willy-nilly say, oh, it's my opinion, that should be banned. We live in a country where there is a rule of law that says that when a product is introduced into the marketplace, that if it's a food or a dietary ingredient or a botanical supplement or dietary supplement, that it has to follow a regulatory and statutory pathway in order to get onto the marketplace. And whether the critics like it or not, that's the fact. Alcohol kills hundreds of thousands of people. Tobacco causes cancer and the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people each year. And I don't hear people squawking about that. They just accept it. And here we have a product that is really helping people, truly helping them. And you get these critics who won't disclose the facts and circumstances about some of their claims against kratom. That ought to be open and freely discussed, and where we can find ways to agree that there ought to be limitations, then let's do that. But let's not just say, oh, we want to ban everything, because I don't believe, based on the conversations I've had with people that are part of that group, that in fact that's their common belief. It is the belief held by a couple of extremists who use that viewpoint in order to promote their own crusade against kratom.
Thank you, Mac. And the vendors that have been reported by the AAKA to the FDA, have you cross-checked to see what lawsuits, if any, there against the reported vendors?
So no, we haven't checked the cross-check. I've watched it generally, but I haven't done a specific analysis. The reports that we made against the vendors to the Food and Drug Administration, which is now over 100 in the last 3 years, all were using illegal therapeutic claims. That if you buy my kratom, it will cure fibromyalgia or cancer or whatever goofy thing they want to say, or it'll get you off opioids, or it will relieve pain. Those are illegal therapeutic claims. It does not mean that they're not true. Don't get me wrong. What it says is you're not allowed under the statute to use that kind of a therapeutic claim in order to convince a customer to buy your product. And so you can't do it. And so to answer the question specifically, of the 100 that have been reported, there hasn't been a single prosecution against those companies, even though their claims are illegal. We submitted the documentation to the FDA that was actionable, and the FDA has refused to do a damn thing about it. So that's unfortunate. The reality is that for those companies that are being sued by trial attorneys, that doesn't mean that their products are bad either. And every suit that I've seen is really specific to a failure to inform the patient, therefore triggering a product liability assessment against the company because they didn't label their product with adequate warnings. There hasn't been, to my knowledge, any lawsuit that specifically is able, where it's been contested, and that excludes the space dust case, and that excludes the case out in Washington where the court award was because a vendor did make a therapeutic claim that was not justified. And that's why that finding was made against that vendor. It had nothing to do with kratom itself. So I think that as we go forward here, we're going to watch this closely. But right now, there's no correlation that I've seen between those companies that have been reported to the FDA for making illegal therapeutic claims in their marketing and those that are being sued. The trial attorneys have a wide net, and they'll just keep suing anybody they can, but it doesn't mean they won't in the future. Right now, I haven't seen that correlation.
And from Richard, I would love to submit a statement to the Virginia case. Should it be short and sweet, or detailed and or very personal? I don't want to overwhelm, but would like to have the best impact.
Well, I can tell you that the value that an advocate has in making their case is to tell their personal story and how it's impacted your life, and put that appeal into it. We'll carry the day with experts who will participate in the hearing. We're going to talk about the science, but we can't replicate the personal experience that you have had with the benefits that kratom has provided. So if I were in your shoes, then I would encourage you to stress the value and the impact that kratom has had in your life.
And from Richard, I would love to submit a statement to the, I'm sorry, geez. Is the June 25th hearing only for Virginia residents from Misty?
Well, I don't think so, but we're finding that out. We've submitted the request to the staff at the Board of Pharmacy to find out exactly what the hearing is going to be like. I don't think they've seen a hearing like we're going to have in the past, because this is pretty routine stuff, and suddenly they got kratom on their agenda. I think they're going to learn a lot, but we'll know within the next day or so exactly what the parameters are, what they will allow, how much time is given to each speaker, and we'll do our best with that, and we'll circulate that information. But thank you for that question, because it's obviously pertinent. I suspect that they will not restrict Virginia only to Virginia residents, but we'll find out.
And from Pam, what happened to the committee work with Senator Donovan?
Senator Donovan was a great advocate for us and will continue to be so. This is now separate from the legislative process. This is an agency of state government that is now, because of the processes that they're bound to follow, have had a complaint and a petition filed to ban kratom, and they're going to see it through.
And from Wayne, a similar question about hearing for Virginia. We will be in touch with that hearing and how you all can participate. And from Ed, you mentioned the FDA's study of 40 kratom consumers escalatory dosing. Would this panel in Virginia be aware of the FDA's own pronouncements? How would we reference the said study?
So, great question. They will know, because we're going to be right up in their faces telling them that. There is nothing that's more important than to be able to say that the FDA is deceiving the Board of Pharmacy today. Because if you look at the FDA and Kratom website, there is no mention of their dose finding study. And yet they conducted that dose finding study. And it's really amusing to listen to the trial attorneys try to minimize what that study actually did. It was never purported to be anything but an evaluation of 40 human participants who would consume kratom at an escalating dose level to find out at what point an adverse event is triggered, a serious adverse event. They studied all of the vital signs of every participant at every dose. They were tracking it closely. The FDA expected to get an adverse event at the much lower dose level. They got to 12 grams of kratom consumed in a 5-minute period. 12 grams, 24 capsules, half a gram each, in a 5-minute period, and they had 2 that experienced mild nausea. That's when they said, okay, we've seen enough. We're not going to see a serious adverse event. So yes, we will have that front and center. And then the more important point is that this study, and for those who try to minimize it, say, oh, it was just 40 people. It was designed to determine whether or not kratom could be safely consumed so that the FDA could then ethically move to a human abuse potential study. And we passed that bar. That's what it's designed to do. And by the way, there's lots of other studies out there, including human clinical trials, that show that it's safe at much higher doses than even was provided by this FDA dose finding study. But the FDA today is not publicizing it. They're not acknowledging it, nor are they acknowledging the deferral in the federal court to come and testify under oath about whether kratom was dangerous, when they say the bizarre statement on the record that they have not yet come to the determination of whether kratom is dangerous or not. What? For 10 years they've been saying that it's dangerous. Look at the Federal Register notice in 2016 and in 2017 when they filed, where they addressing factor 6, where they said it poses an imminent threat to the safety of the American public. That's their statement. And then they want to say to a federal judge, well, we haven't come to a determination whether it's dangerous or not. They should have that up on the FDA and Kratom website today. If they were playing fair, if they were evaluating the true science, the FDA should be doing that, but they won't, because they have an embedded bias against kratom that they're going to continue to prosecute unfairly, and they need to fix it. We're going to fix that, because we're going to be telling everyone and the Board of Pharmacy that not only is the FDA made these conclusions, they're lying about it once again, because they failed to disclose the truth of what their position is on kratom. I got a little excited about that, because it infuriates me that the FDA thinks they can conduct business that way for the American people.
And does anyone know why Jennifer Brandt filed this petition in Virginia to begin with?
I've not had the chance to talk to her yet. I'm looking forward to that occasion, and I'll report back.
And how are things in Ohio?
So I just had a discussion this morning early with the Ohio lobbyist that we have retained, and he's working with the Department of Agriculture, and they've made a couple of proposed amendments to the KCP in Ohio. Everyone knows we now have one in West Virginia and Kentucky, and it's kind of encircling them. So the proposed amendments, one was a little difficult because I think they missed the mark, and I've explained it to them. Hopefully they'll accept that. But I think we're very close to an agreed upon framework moving forward. And we'll see action in the fall when the Ohio legislature reconvenes prior to the election.
From Jim, I'm late to the meeting. Where are we with the KCPA in Illinois? How can we quickly spread the word for local companies about the issues?
So unfortunately, the legislative process in Illinois is complicated. They've officially ended their session for now, and we're hopeful that we'll get another opportunity. Well, we will in 2025 for sure. But we had a great informational meeting with the Consumer Protection Division about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Dr. Kirsten Smith, Jim Carroll, and I made presentations there. It was a terrific. The exchange of issues back and forth was exceptional. So I think we're going to make progress there. It's just a slow process. I think that's true in many of these states. But we've had good victories here this year. I think we've got another one coming. There's going to be a action, I think, in Rhode Island shortly. So I think we've got great momentum. We keep pushing forward.
Great. Thank you, Mac. And then from Pam, I'd love to be there, but I'm having knee replacement surgery on the 14th, but I will do my best. Would be good to see you again, Mac.
Well, I wish I could see you again, and certainly good luck on the surgery. Use your kratom to alleviate the pain. I can say that, Bender can't.
And from Lavada Guthrie, husband and I are Virginia residents. I've been an advocate for years in the legislature on other issues and ready to lobby about this on behalf of my husband. The online petition now has over 1,900 comments with the majority in favor.
Lavada, make it 1901. And then the next person make it 1902. And let's just keep adding to it. We cannot have enough. We've got to overwhelm. There'll be pushes that will get other anti-kratom people involved in this. And we just need to keep fighting, because we have the one thing that is on our side that the other side does not, and that's the truth. And the truth is that kratom from a scientific basis is not justified for scheduling under the standards set by the Virginia statute. And we have the truth that kratom is actually saving people's lives. It's helping them on a daily basis for people that otherwise are struggling. And it's what Dr. Joie said, that kratom offers an option to people that are suffering from acute and chronic pain that would otherwise be forced into far more dangerous drugs like opioids that have a much higher safety profile and potential deadly in their use. So kratom is a great alternative, responsibly consumed and responsibly manufactured and labeled to help people.
I believe our final question, as a Virginia resident, I've already commented and plan to be there on the 25th. Is there anything else we can do between now and then?
Well, stay tuned for information as we go forward. There may be things that we'll ask the community to do, but between now and then, recruit some of your friends, your family members to join you in defending kratom on this website. Publish your comment. Let's keep building that narrative, because it will have an effect. I can tell you that when the World Health Organization Expert Committee on Drug Dependence looked at the 80,000 plus comments, not just signatures, comments on their website, it made an impact, because it sent the clear, unmistakable message that people were benefiting from kratom. And it wasn't just a petition. These were heartfelt comments. So it makes a difference. And I think that the volume, the number of comments will be important, but these members of the board are going to be looking around and poking around, and they're going to click on some of these comments. We want them to see your experience, the fact that you have benefited from kratom, that it's helped you in your life, or it saved your life. Whatever your personal circumstance is, it will make a great deal of difference, and you might be the one they click on. So don't miss that opportunity.
It's great, Mac. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us this evening. Do you have any closing comments, Mac?
So I'll just say this. I know that there is a lot of chatter in the community today about, the new entrance into the advocacy space. We are believers at the AKA in this being a free speech right of anyone, whether it's an industry group or a consumer group. We want people to have options. We are working hard at the AKA to improve our message. We're working to extend to other groups, even those that we disagree with, the opportunity to have a dialogue. We've been turned down, as I mentioned earlier, with that extremist leadership of the KDA. We want to continue to seek the truth and identify areas where we can, in fact, improve the content of the legislation that we promote on a state basis. And we can't do that if we're not talking to one another. And so I appeal again to those that are critics out there of the AKA, that we engage in that dialogue. I know that there are people that have had situations where they don't agree with the AKA. And I will just reemphasize to you, we're not perfect. We try our best. And you can criticize the AKA in many ways, but you're not going to criticize us on the basis of the effort that we put forward, because we believe in this. I get direction from Matt Salmon and the board members all the time to make sure that we as efficiently and effectively represent your viewpoint as we can. We work to do that. It is inevitable that there will be people who will be unhappy with what we're doing. I get that. And it's not intentional. I can't fill enough time in the day to be able to say thank you to the influencers in the Kratom community, the leaders in the industry that really want to do this right, the advocates who are willing to put their blood, sweat, and tears behind this. You see things that organically occur in this community that are truly amazing. Advocates are putting together documentaries on Kratom. You see tireless efforts by some of these top influencers in the community who are trying to disseminate information. The Kratom gals, Melody Wolf, it goes on and on. I mean, the level of engagement of people that are trying to help, trying to do these things. You've got the Kratom podcast group out of Boston. You've got Cami out of California. These are organic groups that have simply trying to disseminate great information, truthful information that motivates people in the Kratom community. And I'm personally eternally grateful for it, because it helps. I want to be cheerleaders for them as best I can. And the AKA wants to be advocates for you in this space. I see individuals who will sacrifice to go to their state capital. Bud Smith up in New York is the poster child of this. He's willing to take time off of work and make a personal sacrifice. And then I see how people in the community rally behind him and help him just with some money to help him pay for gas or for meals while he's up there. This is a community that's unified. That these are good people. These are people that are really interested in not only promoting the truth, but helping each other. And that's gratifying to see. There aren't many circumstances in today's society. It's vastly different than political parties, right? Where you get philosophically, you get behind some candidate, one or the other, but there's always this payoff at the end, which is going to happen on election day. With Kratom, it's like whack-a-mole. We have to keep fighting. We have to continue to do it. And diligence and persistence are important as we go forward. And then we keep getting the critics that jump up and say, I can do this better than they do it, or I have a better idea. And they're not listening to me. And all of those may, on a case-by-case basis, be accurate, but it's not intentional. And we certainly want to encourage, uplift, and do everything that we can. And my thanks to all those people and the many more that support it that I wasn't able to get to. Jordan out there in California that's doing the documentary. All of these people are amazing. And you see Dion who is out there fighting in California and nationally every chance he gets. These are the examples of people whom I admire, who are willing to selflessly engage and involve at great personal cost in order to uplift the entire community. So again, I can't say enough about that. We're now going to enter the next phase of accepting nominations for our Hall of Fame. We did the original Legacy Hall of Fame, which recognized as best we could people that were part of the 2016 start of this movement. And now we want to recognize the people that are on the ground today moving forward and helping in this community. And I will say, without question, there are many vendors that are doing the same thing. They're standing up, they're fighting, they're helping. And, it's not just their personal financial interest, because that's tied in, but they're actually talking and advocating for their customers, the average Kratom consumer. And the scientific community is truly amazing. The courageous efforts that are being conducted by people like Chris McCurdy and Kirsten Smith and Oliver Grunman and the team of people, Jack Henningfield, Marilyn Eustace, that list goes on. Ed Royer, boys, I mean, there are people out there that are doing great things in order to advance our cause, and they need to be recognized equally for the contributions they're making, because theirs is the pure science. The people that are actually trying to find out what the rigorous scientific reviews actually tell us about Kratom. And they do so in the face of some of these critics that say, oh, well, that's the AKA that's funding them. The AKA has never funded a single penny. Listen to that, Wendy. Not a single penny in research for Kratom, ever. And yet you'll say it over and over again, because that's the big lie that you've been told by the trial attorneys. The truth is that the money, that the majority of the money that is invested in research comes from the National Institutes on Drug Abuse, your taxpayer money, because Nora Volkow, the director there, is committed to find the truth about Kratom. And then you have some individual efforts, one of which was sponsored by a philanthropist whose family had a family member that benefited from Kratom. He personally was not involved, but he was willing to write a check for some scientific research that advanced the cause, to better understanding about Kratom and what its true effects were. And all of that contributes to a body of evidence that's irrefutable against the slings and arrows that are fired by people who irresponsibly want to criticize Kratom just because for their own selfish purposes. When they're willing to have a discussion, even a tough one, I've offered it repeatedly. They refuse. They don't want to have an open discussion. They hide behind their walls that they erect. I can't join their KDA Facebook page. I can't join their forums on their website. They block me. And that's unfortunate, because what can I do other than tell the truth, right? Or my opinion. That's fair to say that sometimes what I express are opinions too. So that's our challenge. We need to rally and support one another as best we can. Where we have disagreements, let's openly discuss those. Let's not be nasty to one another. Let's do what we can to be uplifting and supportive. And that's my goal. And I think the American Kratom Association is absolutely committed to that objective. And we will continue to work with all of you in positive, uplifting ways to accomplish that goal. So thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. I know there's a lot on the call, a lot on live streaming on the platforms. This will obviously be available for people to watch going forward. So thank you to everyone, and I hope you have a great evening.
Great. Thank you, Mac. Have a good evening.